Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Nilanjan Sarkar, and I'm Deputy Director of the LSE South Asia Centre here at the London School of Economics. Thank you, everyone, for joining this afternoon in this event, which is the second in our series of events that we are doing with Banglar Pathshala Foundation, which is an NGO and a charity based in Dhaka. The aims and activities of the foundation are to do activities that aim to impact the public for a better understanding of issues of relevance and interest to Bangladesh. And our online events are academic conversations. These are academic platforms. And for this series in particular, we have decided to focus on the ideas of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who's the founding father of Bangladesh and who led the country to independence and freedom in 1971. Various aspects of his thought. We had an earlier event in the last term, for those of you who've been following us, which were on his economic ideas, and also his vision and his ideas and their continuing relevance today. This afternoon's event is titled Cultural Nationalism and the Making of Bangladesh. I'm not going to say too much about the foundation itself, because I'm just going to invite its founder and chairperson, Ahmed Javed Chaudhry, to say a few words. But before that, I'd like to say a very warm welcome to all of you who have joined us from across the world, across time zones in different parts of the world, because I have seen the emails and I know that they've come from various parts of the world, including various parts of Britain, I should add. So a very big and very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining in on this Wednesday afternoon. I'd also like to welcome our speaker, Professor Fakrul, as well as our discussant, Professor Gurpreet Mahajan, to this event for their time, for their expertise, and about which we will hear more. This event is happening via Zoom and is being live streamed on YouTube. And as you will see, the chat box is available. Please do ask questions and type your questions over there. I will read out the questions that you have asked at irregular intervals to the speaker, to the discussant. You can pose a question to individuals. You can pose a general question, which we can then ask, but please do type it over there. If you would like to tweet, if you are on social media, then please do tag us on @SAsiaLSC, and it'll be very good to hear your views. Now, I should add here that had this event been happening on site at LSC, there is a rule that members of the audience at any event at the London School of Economics are allowed to ask a question without revealing their identity or mentioning their name. In trying to remain close to that spirit, when I pose questions from what you ask on YouTube, I will not be announcing your name. I'll simply be asking the question. So that's just to let you know that's the reason why your name doesn't get mentioned. But please do ask questions. Don't let this put you off in any way. It is now my very pleasant task to introduce and invite Ahmed Javed Chaudhry, who is founder and chairperson of Banglar Pathshala. Ahmed does Banglar Pathshala entirely for the love of it, but he does have a day job as well. He's assistant professor in economics at City University in Dhaka. Ahmed, please speak now.
Thank you, Nilanjan. Today we gather with a profound sense of purpose and reverence as we embark on a journey to delve into the rich tapestry of Bengali cultural nationalism and its role in shaping the birth of Bangladesh from East Pakistan. The Banglar Pathshala Foundation is honored to host this collaborative event with the LSE South Asia Centre, focusing on the theme Cultural Nationalism and the Making of Bangladesh. This occasion is not merely a commemoration, it is a testament of our collective commitment to understanding the intricate nuances of our cultural heritage and its profound impact on the trajectory of our nation's history. The unique nature and secular underpinnings of Bengali cultural nationalism have played a pivotal role in the struggle for liberation, shaping the identity and aspirations of the people of Bangladesh. As we gather here today, we honor the visionaries and trailblazers who championed the cause of cultural nationalism fostering a sense of unity and solidarity among the diverse communities of East Pakistan. Their unwavering commitment to social justice, equality, and secularism laid the foundation for the emergence of Bangladesh as an independent and sovereign nation. Through this collaborative seminar, we aim to foster an environment of intellectual exploration and dialogue where scholars and thinkers can come together to reflect on the enduring legacy of Bengali cultural nationalism. By examining its historical roots and contemporary relevance, we seek to gain insights that resonate with the challenges and aspirations of our time. At the heart of Banglar Pathshala Foundation lies a steadfast commitment to emancipation through cultural awareness and education. We believe that by understanding and celebrating our cultural heritage, we empower ourselves to envision a future built on the principles of inclusivity, tolerance, and pluralism. This event not just a seminar, it is an invitation to embark on a collective journey of diverse discovery, reflection, and enlightenment. We are deeply honored to have distinguished speakers and scholars with us today, and we eagerly anticipate the exchange of ideas and perspectives that will enrich our understanding of cultural nationalism and its role in shaping our nation's destiny. Thank you for joining us on this momentous occasion. Together, let us celebrate the enduring spirit of Bengali cultural nationalism and reaffirm our commitment to preserving and promoting our rich cultural heritage for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Javed. It is now my very pleasant task to introduce the speaker as well as the discussant. Fakrul Alam is Professor and Director, Sheikh Mujib Research Institute for Peace and Liberty, and Supernumerary Professor in the Department of English at the University of Dhaka in Bangladesh. Amongst his several publications are a translation of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's The Unfinished Memoirs, which were published in 2012. Our discussant for this afternoon, Gurpreet Mahajan, recently retired as professor from the Center for Political Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Amongst her several publications is The Multicultural Path, Issues of Diversity and Discrimination in Democracy, which was published in 2002. Professor Alam will speak first for about half an hour, 40 minutes, after which we will have the discussion. Professor Alam, please speak now.
Thank you. Let me just begin by correcting my, the introduction that you gave. I'm no longer supernumerary professor, and I am no longer director. I resigned from that, and I'm now at the moment Bangladesh Chair Professor in the Department of History. I've retired from the Department of English, so a little bit of a change. Also, I changed the title a bit, reading Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's Unfinished Memoirs in the Light of Bangladeshi Cultural Nationalism. So that's my little bit of tinkering with the title that was given. But let me begin talking and delivering my lecture. Let me begin by thanking Dr. Nilanjan Sarkar, Deputy Director of the LSE South Asia Center, and Mr. Ahmed Javed Rani, Chairperson of Banglar Pathshala Foundation, for inviting me to deliver this virtual lecture as part of the Bangabandhu International Lecture Series. It is indeed a privilege to be able to speak to everyone present. At the outset, let me present to you the theoretical framework that will direct my lecture. For some time, as a student of cultural studies, I've been taken by Raymond Williams's notion of what he proposes at the outset of his classic 1958 essay, Culture is Ordinary, the idea of what he calls a lived culture. Do note that he first accentuates here the word lived. He then stresses the idea of a growing culture. He next comes up with another unforgettable formulation. Culture is a whole way of life. For Williams, culture is not for a few. It is not possible for him to endorse the formulation of his fellow Cambridge colleague F. R. Lewis's idea of mass civilization and minority culture. Instead, he observes, a culture is common meanings, the product of a whole people, and offered individual meanings. the product of a man's whole committed personal and social experience. They're made by living, made, and remade. It will be the beginning assumption of my presentation that the man we in Bangladesh have been calling Bangabandhu, or friend of Bengal, and whom we have also honored with the phrase father of the nation, is the product of a lived culture in the way Williams conceives it and emerges from it, and of course embodies it. I will also try to show Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's cultural position as one that is rooted, but not a static one. In other words, his beliefs have evolved over time with the beliefs of his fellow countrymen and women living in what is now Bangladesh, was once East Pakistan, before it had been East Bengal, and had once upon a time been viewed only as a part of Bengal. I will also be showing that Mujib, he was once widely addressed thus, represented the whole people, and that while his beliefs, like those of his people, developed over time, they did so with remarkable pace from mid-1935 to the 1970s, when these beliefs were formed and reformed crucially. The second source of my conception of the kind of cultural nationalism with which I would like to frame Mujib's is one based on Eric Taylor Wood's introduction to the concept. In his paper on the subject, which I found online, he suggests that the term, quote, refers to ideas and practices that relate to the intended revival of a purported national community's culture, focused on the cultivation of a nation, unquote. Wood indicates that in the hands of a visionary, it sets out to provide a vision of the nation's identity, history, and destiny, nurtured by its intellectuals and artists. It predates political nationalism, providing the groundwork for it, and in many ways is a consequence of a culture's encounter with modernity. It cultivates in gifted and creative people the sense of possibilities and inspires them to consider the recovery and celebration of a nation's history and culture, language being a key component in this regard. For Wood, forerunners of such nationalism may take recourse to a nation's folk culture and myths, as well as history, to draw attention to a common descent. Wood's paper will lend to my presentation the idea that Mujib found in his family's history and his people's history and culture, as well as the Bengal landscape and the Bengali language, a vision that would inspire him to adopt the goal of recovering their lost glory and work for the revival of his distinctive national culture. They would do so in a manner that would blend their past traditions with their present situation, thereby moving them to upholding the modern idea that states are based on premises sourced by cultural nationalism. Joab Learson's paper, Nation and Nationalism too, has enabled me to give another dimension to my framing of Mujib's nationalism. Although his paper originated from what it tells us is a specifically European context, I find it useful for my presentation because his basic premise is that all nationalism is cultural nationalism. After this beginning formulation, Learson goes on to state that nationalism begins as the cultivation of culture, since factors such as language or historical awareness trigger it. Learson believes that nationalists will advance the right to national self-determination, cultural survival, and cultural expression as basic to their drive to create a nation that will meet the needs of their people. These elements will motor a nation towards the goal of independence. If these are denied or interfered with, visionary nationalists will reconstitute their political goals and set up new ones that will direct the people to. Interestingly, Learson declares nationalism does not only have to occupy geographical space, something that a social and political movement do, but can take place in a mental ambience. That is why, if I can put it in the words of the 17th century English poet Richard Lovelace, stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage. And we are dealing with prison memoirs, let me add. Learson's essay will enable me in my framing of Mujib's cultural nationalism as something triggered by his love of the history of his part of Bengal, its folk culture and legends, as well as literature and language. I will try to show in my paper that this will lead Mujib to come up with a vision that he will set in terms of cultural ideals and goals he will set for himself and his people that will lead to the birth of Bangladesh. I hope to also depict this vision as something developing in his mind all the time, regardless of whether he is in Bengal and in a relatively or quite free state, or in prison where his body is interned, but his mind free and probing. What I would like to do in the rest of my presentation is to focus mainly on the unfinished memoirs, which is his most sustained attempt to record not only his life events, but also his thoughts about politics and culture. It will be the main source of my extended analysis of Mujib's developing vision of culture and nationalism as the engine that led him to lead his people to freedom in a sequence of events culminating in independence in 1971. For sure, Mujib's developing vision of cultural nationalism and the trajectory that will lead him from thoughts of Pakistan to the birth of Bangladesh is captured vividly in his unfinished memoirs, a work that he wrote in prison probably in 1967. This was a time when the six-point movement had not only begun, but was also gaining momentum swiftly, and was bringing East Pakistan close to the point where it would become Bangladesh. What follows is an attempt to not only track this evolving vision, but also to see it from its roots to the heights it would attain under his leadership. To track this evolving vision, I will talk first of its Gopalganj phase, then of its Kolkata one, and then the Pakistani years, all seen from the perspective of the undisputed leader of his nation he was becoming, as he filled his prison notebooks with an unfinished narrative that nevertheless offers us the portrait of the father of a nation as a young man, and as a middle-aged visionary politician that he had become. The Gopalganj phase, which is to say 1935 to 1942. In the Gopalganj phase, we see in the unfinished memoirs a youth who's primarily conscious of his Bengali Muslim identity, but also not unaffected by early stirrings of Bengali secular nationalism. On the one hand, the pages of the memoirs depicts the first 25 years of his life and shows a youth resenting Hindu Bengali landlords and moneylenders oppressing Bengali Muslim farmers of the Faridpur region. On the other hand, he seems very aware of the anti-colonial sentiments engineered by the Swadeshi movement and by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's anti-British activism, both triggered by a political climate created by the passing of the Government of India Act of 1935. If he is resentful of the Hindu money classes' dominant muscle flexing, he's also carrying in his memory the anti-British activism of his ancestor Sheikh Qudratullah that led the Sheikh to oppose the British indigo planter Mr. Ryan, sometimes probably at the end of the 18th century or the turn of the century. That Sheikh made the Englishman a laughing stock by making a mockery of his impudence and oppressive tactics. In other words, the youthful Mujib's cultural nationalism at this stage is anti-British as well as anti-Hindu to a noteworthy extent. However, he will be seen in the next phase as increasingly wary of Muslim Khajas and Khan Bahadurs as well. In this phase, he seems to be in need of the kind of inspiration that he would be getting from Muslim leaders he encountered in a public meeting in his hometown of Gopalganj, where he comes across not only A.K.M. Fazlul Haq, but also Hossein Shahid Sarwardi. Inspired by Sarwardi in this initial stage of his political life, he is drawn to the Indian Muslim League and appears to be nurturing a kind of grudge then because of the sufferings of ordinary Muslim Bengalis inflicted on them by Hindu, moneyed, and upper-class people of the region. The Kolkata phase, which is to say 1942 to 1947. In the Kolkata phase, he is in the city to study in Islamia College and is a resident of its Baker hostel. Increasingly drawn to the Pakistani movement, he attends a Muslim League conference in Faridpur and is soon working for the birth of Pakistan as an activist. An example of such activism is the part he plays in organizing a Muslim League conference in his hometown of Gopalganj. But more and more contact with party leaders such as Khaja Nazimuddin repulses the budding Bengali Muslim politician. The hot air of a Khan Bahadur of Rangpur, whom he meets in delivering a message from Sarwardi, makes him think of distancing himself from such leaders. As he tells Sarwardi subsequently, quote, "We do not want to compromise with these feudal Khajas. We won't allow the Muslim League to be a party run by a coterie," unquote. The notion of Pakistan he has been nurturing in his mind and his ideas about the partitioning of India are all based on the Lahore Resolution of 1940, presented by one of his heroes of that period, A.K.M. Fazlul Haq. In the unfinished memoirs, Mujib mentions more than once the clauses of the revolution that envisaged a Pakistan, resolution that envisaged a Pakistan whose one wing would comprise of Greater Bengal plus Assam. The other would be made up of western subcontinental provinces of Punjab, Sindh, Baluchistan, and Northwest Frontier Province. When partition takes place and afterwards, he is dismayed by the division that has taken place. This was not the Pakistan he had in mind. He is dismayed as well because Kolkata no longer would be the place he would live in. Indeed, his memoir reflects his sadness in leaving the city and uncertainty about moving to Dhaka, for he hardly knows the city he's having to go to now. In the Kolkata phase of Muslim League activism, Mujib keeps remembering the oppositional positions adopted by Muslims during the Sepoy Mutiny and the Wahhabi movement, and uprisings led by Muslims in Bengal by men like Titmuir and Haji Shariullah of the Fariazi movement, which is to say this ideological bend of the emerging politicians, like his cultural nationalism, is making him veer away from the examples of Hindu ideologues opposing British rule to inspirational instances of Muslim rebels doing so. Indeed, the unfinished memoirs reveal him referring to these Muslim leaders and movements in the speeches that he delivered from the mid-1940s onward. He also finds inspiration in men like Abul Hashim. He cites a Hashim draft calling for the abolition of the Zamindari system. Sarwardi, of course, is going to be his mentor from now on, but he will also find inspiration in Hashim and Hawk. All three men espouse values that were now not conservative and would suit Mujib's drift away from a position that is championed by people upholding feudal and purely money values. In other words, the Muslim League people. Hashim, in fact, is all for the abolition of the Zamindari system and appears to be close to asserting values linked to socialism. Nevertheless, Mujib is still within parameters set during the Pakistan movement at that time. In his memoirs, he recalls evoking in his addresses of the period religious sentiments, offering as causes of such evocations his abhorrence of the stigma of pollution harbored by some upper-class Hindus and the power of Hindu landlords and moneylenders in his part of Bengal. Significantly, too, we see him in North India at around this time, attending two All India Muslim League Delhi conferences, the first one in 1943 and then in 1946. He makes use of these trips to visit famous Muslim sites and monuments in places like Delhi, Ajmer, Lucknow, and Fatehpur Sikri. Noticeably, he mentions almost nothing about other North Indian monuments and sites of other religions in and around the places he visited. What this indicates is that in this phase of the evolution of his nationalism, he's importing only Muslim cultural landmarks into his consciousness, and occluding or ignoring other places of historical and cultural importance of any other religion that he had encountered in his travels. A key transitional landmark in Mujib's ever-evolving nationalist cultural consciousness takes place, however, at the height of the movement for Pakistan, when Muhammad Ali Jinnah declares Direct Action Day on 16 August 1946 to register Muslim protest against the Cabinet Mission Plan's resolution. Mujib, then the General Secretary of Kolkata on the day. But the way things turn out then sobers him about opting for militancy as a route to achieving the Pakistan he had believed in. It was as if all hell had broken loose that day. Rioting and violence are things Mujib encounters everywhere. He is also later witness to a chain effect, for not only is Kolkata devastated, riots and looting takes place in Noakhali and Bihar, helping Hindus as well as Muslims in Kolkata and working in relief camps afterwards in Bihar changes Mujib decisively in a matter that makes him think of non-violence as the best way to protest. The unfinished memoirs presents his readers an intriguing scene, one backed by a rare photo in the print edition of the book, of Mujib and his photographer friend Yaqub in a Kolkata public event, where the Mahatma Sarwardi are trying to heal the wounds created by the violent action of the rioters. The two friends are there to show to Gandhi photographs of the violence committed on Muslims in Kolkata, taken by Yaqub. Was Mujib trying to drive home the message to Gandhi that he should be fully aware of the section most affected by the region, by the rioting, by looking at such photographs? Was he being ironic? Nevertheless, in the end, Mujib comes away from the event impressed by the magician that Gandhi was, for he records the reactions of the people present after Gandhi had spoken. Quote, "People cried out, Hindus and Muslims are brothers," unquote. He sees the whole atmosphere change instantly. In other words, militancy is not the only option. Non-violence can be a way of spreading amity among peoples. Sarwardi, for his part, counsels Mujib, who now return to East Bengal, to the East Bengal that has become East Pakistan, thus. Try to ensure that the Hindus don't flee Pakistan. Which is to say, his guru is reinforcing in him what he is intuiting slowly at this point. Partition might have taken place, but secularism is the option to come out of the mess created during partition. This Pakistan phase, the memoirs cover this phase from 1947 to 54, but let's remember that he was writing it later. The Mujib was now going to try to set himself up somehow in Dhaka and do what he could for East Pakistan in particular, and Pakistan in general, actively attempts to promote religious harmony from now on. The unfinished memoir reveals him working with others to set up an organization called the Democratic Student League. It declares in a meeting that its only objective would be to promote communal harmony. No doubt keeping in mind that then what his guru had told him about trying to prevent the exodus of Hindus from the country. Indeed, Mujib writes unequivocally in his memoirs afterwards, quote, "The most pressing need of our time is communal harmony," unquote. In other words, in his developing notions of cultural nationalism, secularism and socialism had been merging with his belief in democracy around the time of partition and afterwards. Such notions will keep developing in him all the time in the East Pakistan phase of his political life. Mujib says at one point of the unfinished memoirs, with some attempts at modesty, that he had a part in creating Pakistan, albeit a minor one. But he now finds ample evidence of a country being run by an elite that is not trucked with socialism, secularism, and democracy, let alone socialism, and that can only display values associated with feudal mindsets. These are people advocating purely Islamic nationalism, having found it convenient for them to do so. Mujib records his dismay at the betrayal of the ideals he felt had been intrinsic to the Pakistan movement thus. Government policies reflect that, quote, "men who had come to power had no confidence in the masses and were cut off from them," unquote. And he denotes they comprised Khan Bahadur's Khan Sahibs and men who had been knighted by the British. There were as well men who relied entirely on bureaucrats from the British era, who were more interested in advancing themselves than working for the ordinary people. Soon, his protest against the elite people at the helms of the Muslim League leads them to eject Mujib and other young activists like him, opposing the coterie politics in their party. The most important moment in the evolution of Mujib's cultural nationalism that would ultimately move him away from Pakistan, whose creation he believed he had a hand in, and what would take him out and his people towards Bangladesh, is of course the language movement. At its onset, Mujib has enrolled as a MA student of the law department of the University of Dhaka, and has become an activist of the East Pakistan Student League. His activism and actions of other like-minded students lead to Bengali Language Demand Day on March 11, 1948. Protesters like Mujib were jailed briefly, but the confinement has no effect on them. On the contrary, Mujib's declaration on March 19, 1948 that, quote, "Urdu will be the only state language of Pakistan," unquote, only adds fuel to the raging fire that the Bhasha Andolan or movement was becoming. Indeed, Mujib has a major part in orchestrating 21 February, despite the confinement enforced on him at the time. The story is so well known that I will not stress it anymore in this paper, and will be content here to point out only that Mujib's role in it is detailed throughout this part of his memoir. Instead, I will now turn to other aspects of Mujib's developing vision of cultural nationalism in the early years of Pakistan. In this phase of his activism, we see him agitating with others for the rights of the people of East Pakistan and for the values that reveal his commitment to the causes of equality, fraternity, and liberty. He seems to be veering away in this phase of his activism from ideals that were once solely tilted towards the creation of a Muslim state. He now gets involved in the movement supporting landless farm workers or dawals, men who were being deprived of their entitlement to carry away part of the harvest in lieu of cash because of the imposition of the so-called cordon system. The other issue he gets involved in has to do with the due fourth-class employees movement. Mujib's participation in these two movements depict clearly his dedication to causes that reveal a developing commitment to socialism as an essential ingredient of the ideal state he was envisaging. But his agitation on behalf of the due employees lands him in jail, this time for a relatively long period. Till now, my reading of the trajectory of Mujib's activism is one taking him first towards Pakistan and religion-based nationalism, and then away from that course to linguistic nationalism, as well as the notion of a country that is not only democratic, but also socialist and secular. But I would like to switch in the final section of my paper on Mujib and cultural nationalism to other causes of his evolution as a leader of the part of the world that would become Bangladesh, and that would adopt under his leadership in 1972 a constitution whose four pillars were nationalism, socialism, democracy, and secularism. The first of these causes is the geographical makeup of the country. Again and again in the unfinished memoirs, and his other prison books, we find Mujib reflecting on his country's topography and the impact it had on his people's psyche. He feels it is impossible for Bangladeshis to embrace any other ideas, except the ones inscribed in the mindscape, because of the green, watery land that is East Bengal. It is to evoke Raymond Williams's memorable phrase, as if a whole way of life is sustained by such an environment. Surely it provided the main thirst for Mujib's cultural nationalist activism. The ultimate source of Mujib's beliefs surely is the deltaic, watery, and green world he grew up in, something that is reminded of, especially when in strikingly different landscapes. This is why, while taking some time away from the All India Muslim League conference that had taken him to Delhi in 1946, and viewing Ajmer's Anas Sagar Lake and its environs, he feels drawn to a lake that so resembles the wide and beautiful water bodies of East Bengal. But a bit later, he doesn't even feel like viewing the lake anymore because of its desert surroundings. As he puts it in his memoirs, quote, "We are people from a riverine place, and we love our water bodies. How can I explain how difficult it was for us to leave this lake in a land that was otherwise a desert?" Unquote. After partition, and at a time when Mujib had settled down a bit in East Pakistan, campaigning takes him to Brahmanbaria, and a political event that has a musical component. On a boat in a river then, he has the occasion to hear Abbasuddin, the leading singer of Bengali folk songs of that time, sing. Remembering the sentiments evoked in him then years later, Mujib pens in the unfinished memoirs the following lines. And this is a long quote. "I had become Mr. Abbasuddin's devotee by this time. He told me at one point, 'Mujib, there's a conspiracy afoot against the Bengali language. If Bengali is made a state language, Bengal's culture and civilization will be under threat. The songs that you appreciated so much today will lose all the charm and melody. Whatever happens, Bengali must be made the state language.' I pledged to him that I would try to make it our state language, and have done my best to achieve this goal." In other words, at this stage of his evolution as the leader, when he's steadily coming to the forefront of East Pakistan politics, Mujib is beginning to realize intensely that his country's topography and the folk tunes and culture it stirred in his people are among the motors of his ideological formation. While on a trip to West Pakistan some years later to meet Sarwardi and Nazimuddin to brief them on what was happening in East Pakistan, he intuits again the role landscape plays in the ideology underpinning cultural nationalism. This is apparent when he is reminded by Karachi's arid landscapes of the very different greenery of Bengal's environs. He contemplates then on the role the natural environment plays in one's socio-political consciousness. As he puts it, quote, "How could we ever get to like the pitiless landscape? People have an intimate relationship with the environment. We were born into a world that abounded in beauty. We loved whatever was beautiful," unquote. Is it any wonder that in independent Bangladesh, Mujib would choose Tagore's Paean to Bengal and the love it evoked, Amar Sonar Bangla, or My Bengal of Gold, as the national anthem of the country that he had helped create so fittingly? In China, to attend the World Peace Conference in Beijing, as part of the Pakistan delegation in 1952, he delivers his speech in Bengali. This is something he records briefly in the unfinished memoirs, as well as in his more extended account of his China visit, preserved for us in New China, 1952, another of his prison books, where there is a much more detailed account of this trip. He writes rhetorically in the unfinished memoirs, quote, "Why should I not speak in Bengali?" Unquote. It was, he writes proudly, the language of Tagore. Moreover, he notes, the students of East Pakistan had sacrificed their lives for the mother tongue. Unquote. As for himself, "I could speak English fluently, but I felt it was my duty to speak in my mother tongue." In another telling episode of his memoirs, we find him responding to requests from people who are traveling with him in a car that Sarwardi is driving during the West Pakistan trip to recite some poems by Nazrul Islam, the leading Muslim Bengali poet of the 20th century, and the man Bangabandhu would make Bangladesh's national poet in 1972 because he admired the rebel poet so. He does that, but also decides spontaneously unasked to recite from memory Tagore's poems to his West Pakistan traveling companions. In other words, his cultural nationalism, he wants to assert, is the result not only of genuine love for poetry, but also something stemming from his awareness of a process of identity formation, where the Brahmo poet and the Muslim one coexist in a mindscape that had embraced secularism and socialism, and that was priming itself for national emancipation. Not surprisingly then, after the conference is over and the Pakistani delegation has decided to do some sightseeing, Mujib opts to be with the part of the delegation that is eager to visit, quote, industries, agricultural facilities, cultural centers, and museums, unquote, and not at all interested in visiting Muslim religious sites in China, which is what the other members of the delegation were going to. Bengal's riverine landscapes, folk songs, Rabindranath Thakur, the rebel poet Nazrul, and their poetry and songs. The Bengali language, too, would provide the ultimate bedrock of Mujib's cultural nationalism. He was forever attuned to his people's cultural, political, and economic needs. And that is why his nationalism kept evolving in a manner that would always appeal much to the people of Bangladesh. This is why, from the time he came back to his part of Bengal after the partition of India, he became more and more popular and ultimately the standout leader. In fact, the examples of the way he appealed for his grassroots intuitions are many. Campaigning for a seat in the provincial election for instance, he encounters a poor old woman who hands over part of her scant savings to him saying, quote, the prayers of the poor will be with you, unquote. He wins the election handily and realizes then that, quote, if you love the people, they would reciprocate, unquote. Now and later, and until Bangladesh became an independent country, he wins every election he participates in and earns the devotion of his people, since he is so attuned to their needs. He knows by that time that he and leaders like Sawardi Fazl Haq and Maulana Bhashani are so popular because they have won, quote, the love of the people of our country, unquote, by being sensitive to their needs and aspirations, to the changing needs and aspirations, I should say. As he evolved as a leader in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, then Mujib had achieved prominence decade by decade by being in sync with his people. The predominantly Muslim Bengalis of East Pakistan had wanted, quote, an exploitation-free society, and economic and social progress, unquote, all the time. But the early years of Pakistan had disillusioned them. Like them, by 1967, which is when he was writing the prison notebooks that constitute the unfinished memoirs, they were well set on a course that would lead them away from East Pakistan and turn them away from the Pakistan they had dreamt of. His and their concept of Pakistan had been made and remade until it turned into one that envisaged an independent country for them all. They would now become Bangladeshis under his leadership, language being the catalyst in the emergence as a distinct nation. We can thus read his memoirs as the portrait of a people's politician, developing over the decades because he was so immersed in their lives and receptive to their changing aspirations. Reviewing his political development in confinement while writing his memoir, he knew that what was needed for the future was a Bangladesh free of, quote, any form of communalism and prejudice, unquote, receptive to socialism, and ready with a constitution that would be inculcating democratic and secular values and promoting the kind of nationalism that would not stand in the way of peace and amity with other nations. This Bangladesh is what he and his associates created with the help of the people around him who participated in the liberation war and who helped him frame the 1972 Bangladesh Constitution. It is no doubt our misfortune that he was assassinated only 3 years later, and the cultural nationalism he had nurtured seen as problematic by not a few people in subsequent decades. But it is time for us all to source his 3 books, letters and speeches, and turn to our archives to reconceptualize his brand of cultural nationalism and update it for our times. It is at the root of his cultural nationalism, which he and the men and women of his generation and the 1971 Liberation War participants strove to actualize, to create the independent nation that is our dear Bangladesh. After all, they are the root of our nation, and we must do our best to preserve it for our time. This paper is my attempt to do so by a reading of his unfinished memoirs. I hope to do later readings of his 2 other posthumously published works and his speeches and letters that have now been available. Thank you for listening, and thank you once more, my dear Ronnie and Mr. Sarkar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Alam, for your lecture. Professor Mahajan, would you like to speak now?
First, thank you very much for this invitation to join in this conversation. And so my thanks to South Asia Center, to Dr. Sarkar in particular, for this opportunity. And I must thank you also because it has given me an opportunity to hear Professor Fakrul Alam, whom I have not had an opportunity to hear before this. And it has been a delight. He's taken us through, I think, a journey and thinking about so many different issues. I must, however, begin with a disclaimer. I am, unlike Professor Fakrul Alam, I have very limited knowledge about the ideas and the trajectory of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. But I think Professor Alam's presentation of his journey and the ideas of cultural nationalism has thrown up many different issues which we might think about, not only to understand the man, the nation, but also the issues that confront almost all societies today, the world over, no matter where you are located. I want to raise three interrelated issues which interest me, and I think which we might discuss also further. I think I'm first of all struck by the fact that around 1970s or so, the discourse on nationalism in many parts of Western Europe and North America are already taking a slightly different turn. We have civic nationalism emerging, which is talking about forming a political community around some shared political values. And they don't bring other dimensions, and particularly the affective dimension. And I think what is very interesting in South Asia is that continuously there is a undercurrent, or I think sometimes very clear understanding that you'll need to have some affective dimension to bringing people together and inculcating a sense of belonging within them. And I understand Professor Alam is suggesting that for Mujibur Rahman, this was looking at something called a shared culture or a cultural inheritance of a community, etc. Of course, culture is a catch-all category. I think you have defined it in terms of primarily language, and I think that's a peculiar sort of understanding that I find much more predominant in the West than in the world that we inhabit, because we know, and you have hinted at it on many in the talk itself. For instance, when Mujibur Rahman is looking at poetry and literature that is available, he's looking at various traditions, both whether it's a Brahmo tradition or the Muslim tradition. So you have, as it were, a close interplay of culture and religion and many other dimensions within culture, of language and religion and so many other dimensions. So I think the big issue for us, therefore, is to ask ourselves, and I would like some more information on that. How does one appeal to an affective dimension while ensuring that it remains inclusivist, which is, I think, the agenda you have suggested Mujibur Rahman had. I think one would need to know a little bit more, I think, particularly because we are confronted with issues of this kind even today. How do we ensure that balance? What kinds of laws and policies in different dimensions and different spheres are needed in order to ensure that we recognize that some affective dimension will be there, but that should not necessarily translate into something inclusive, exclusivist. The second related issue I have in mind is the way you have outlined the idea of identity, or at least that is the way I heard you talk about this. I think what came across to me is that identity, we have many different identities, we take that for granted, but that identity is constructed and we privilege a particular dimension of it in a given context. So depending on the context, different elements of ourselves and our identities comes to the fore. We know, where you mentioned the time when his identity is shaped by his sense of marginalization of the Muslim community economically, politically, etc., and the Muslim identity comes to the fore. But then there is a time after partition when he realizes and when he feels that actually there is another kind of marginalization that is taking place. It's both political and, in that sense, linguistic, cultural, etc., etc., and that needs to be rectified. So I think there is a play, and one needs to think in terms of contexts within which these identities come to the fore, and therefore nothing can be ever taken for granted. That you may constitute, as in this case, Bangladesh, around a Bengali identity, but other elements will filter in. My third quick question that I would like to pose here is, you use two phrases in quick succession within the same sentence, somewhere in the middle. You talked about his Bengali Muslim identity and Bengali secular identity. And I thought the most interesting question really for us today is, can there be a Bengali or any Muslim identity which is also a Bengali secular identity? Is it an either or? And surely he tried to balance the two. And how did he do it? I think that would be very interesting. And lastly, I think you have mentioned many times the elements that he wanted to put together: secularism, socialism, democracy. And again, I think secularism means so many different things to each of us. It would be interesting to have a little some observations from you about what did this secularism imply to him, considering that he has foregrounded so many different aspects of his personality, of his identity at different moments in time. So thank you for this very thought-provoking presentation, and I'll just leave it there at this moment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mahajan. I'm sure we'll come back as the discussion progresses. If I could just announce, for the benefit of those who are watching us on YouTube, that please do type in your questions in the chat box that you would like, and I will post them in due course. Please feel free to do so. Professor Alam, would you like to respond to the points that Professor Mahajan has raised?
Yeah, I think that one of the things I've been trying to point out is that it's an evolving thing, this identity thing. So begins with the emphasis on the Muslim side, and then starts moving towards the Bangla side, the language movement being the catalyst of all of this. Let me just add what Professor Gurpreet Mahajan, excuse me, I may be wrong in this, will underestimate unless if in an only Bangladeshi knows that the Bhasha Andolan was everything for us in the 60s, 50s and the 60s. When it began in the 50s and then in the 60s, our consciousness was formed. Mine was by that. Rabindranath came in. I've written about Rabindranath and Bangladesh national identity formation and how he comes in a very big way. He was always there, but he was kind of marginalized and not frowned upon by the official government. And then he came in, and the Bhasha Andolan liberated him, let loose our feelings about him. And this is certainly that we see again and again. The other point I want to make is, and I think I tried to make this point there, that he starts moving away from the Muslim League, because he also begins to emphasize the feudalism that he sees, the upper class, tactics that they employ, and he moves closer and closer and closer to people. So I point out two instances when he's when he gets directly involved with the landless farmers. He's still a student. He's still a student of law in Dhaka University, and then he gets involved with the fourth-class employees of Dhaka University where he's studying. So what happens is not only language, but I think everything else that he's doing is activism. He's coming closer to people, to the village folks when he's campaigning. Kolkata boy coming back and originally from the village and then getting to the grassroots. So I've tried to use the phrase bedrock. These are the bedrocks of his nationalism. So, the political thing that comes in is there. But let me just say that other than the Bhasha Andolan, which has made him, to me, and Bangladesh, which is where he led us to, the constitution that he gave us in 1972 was absolutely, I think, the most wonderful thing that he gave us. If only we could hold on to it and, execute it. And those are the four pillars of our constitution, as we tend to say, is nationalism, democracy, socialism, and secularism. And I think he exemplifies this progress towards the constitution. So I could have actually done my paper and say towards the 1972 constitution. And as I said before, he only had 3 years. So I don't know whether I'm answering your question, but I think that the Bengali Muslim identity was prioritized at one point, and then the secular identity began to be emphasized. The language movement was a catalyst for that. And, as he moved closer and closer, not only the Bhashala Andolan, he went back to his roots, to his people. I'd like to emphasize what I've said, because as a student of literature and somebody who cannot escape from Romanticism and the Romantic influence, that the landscape plays a very important part. And he emphasizes it again and again. He does so in his other books, very memorably, vividly. He does so when he goes to China. He does so when he's in prison, and he talks about the greenery. And so to me, in his mind, underlying it all is the land, the land, and then the language, and then the people. And so stage by stage, he evolves towards the Bangladesh constitution after having led us to independence. So the affective dimension, which you mentioned, is also part of this. He's moved. He's very emotional. You watch him on video and you see that he cries easily. The poor woman gives him some money and is totally moved by that. So he's moved by the landscape. He's moved by the people he meets. He's moved by what he sees in the in Direct Action Day in Kolkata. He's moved by the refugees he sees in Bihar. You can see him agonizing. And there are other things, I know there are one or two other printed things, the things that I've had access to, but that has not been printed yet, where you can see his emotions, getting emotional with Sarwardi at one point, and then, realizing that he has overdone it. So that kind of a person, and it's not surprising that he would be affected so much by all of these things. Okay. I don't know whether that answers the question.
Professor Mahajan, did you want to come back?
I was just going to say that I'm not questioning your presentation of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's journey, but I'm just thinking from it whether we might think of identity that we have, because we have so many multiple identities at any time. Some things get privileged contingently at a given moment in time, and others get layered underneath. And that helps me to think in terms of the fact that you said that your generation, or you particularly, I would think of the whole generation,
my whole generation
really being influenced by the Bhasha Andolan. And I can understand that. But one can also ask this question subsequently: why are the same people who were once moved by Bhasha Andolan not able to hold on to that ideal or vision that Mujibur Rahman had? One could give many reasons for it. And I think one of the things, because we are talking only about identity, is the fact that there are these multiple layers. And his vision may have foregrounded one for the formation of the nation, but the others were lying down there, and well, they can always be contingently privileged in a different kind of context. So I was thinking of context in that sort of way. But
I wish I could invite you to Dhaka in February.
It's been a pleasure to hear you.
In February, we have two events. We have the Ekushe Day celebrations, very solemn, but they're now celebrations, and the Boi Mela, the Bangla Academy Boi Mela. These are two. The Boi Mela is huge, so is Ekushe all over the country. So they're there. Now you can talk about counter currents coming in from outside, and you can talk about other things that are in the national identity formation being prioritized. But come to Dhaka in February and you'll realize that the language movement is very active, very much there. And the Boi Mela is another testament. I don't know whether Professor Sarkar has been to the Boi Mela in Dhaka or not, but if you come to Dhaka, you understand that very much there. And about me, in the 50s, early part, I was just a child, but my parents were influenced, and they made me what I am. They made me listen to Ravindra Sangeet. They made me listen to, all Shukanto, all kinds of songs of activism. And that is how I grew up. My para, my neighborhood was like that. So 50s, 60s was like that. And it's still there. 70s, it was very much there. You should come to Dhaka. Another occasion to come is Poila Boishakh, the first day of our calendar. And you see the national celebrations there. So it's very much there.
We have a couple of questions, but I think I was just going to say something else. Shall we take one of the questions that has just come in, which says, have you noticed, I'm just going to literally read it verbatim because I don't want to paraphrase someone else's question, which is, have you noticed any discrepancy between the popular cultural representation and the more official representation of the father of the nation?
There are discrepancies, and they're bound to be. I mean, they're bound to be. There's, people now have access not only to official channels, but to the mobile phone, to digital mediums, and dissent is very much there. But, I've noticed to some extent, and there's no way you can not notice these. So if that's a question, there is. There are murmurings, there are, pockets, sure.
No, I think the question, what the question is sort of indicating or moving towards is that there's a wider general popular perception of the father of the nation, and the examples that you were giving about February and the first day of the new year celebrations, etc. Which is a buy-in from the common people of the wider ideas, but there is also an official profiling of the father of the nation. And is there a discrepancy? Is there a gap between the two? I think that is what the question was more hinting towards. I don't think it's so much about social media or platforms or anything.
Well, I'm sure it depends on where you're standing. So, I'm sure that the view of some people are quite different. They're standing in different terrain than I am. So it's not surprising. There will be differences from the official version. And, I don't know what official version is being referred to, but there are a lot of things on the media. If you just watch television, some of the television channels, you see that a lot of the cultural nationalism that we've been talking about is very much there, very active, is thriving.
Javed, did you want to ask something?
No, just
go ahead,
fine.
Ronnie. Go ahead. Ronnie is very dear to me, so
Right. Just the I would ask Professor Fakrul Alam that he's been working on Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's books, and his 3 books he has translated and wrote many of the essays on Sheikh Mujib. So he's a great expert on this field. So let him speak what his expertise suggestion.
To be fair, Javed, that is not a question.
yeah.
And that is what I think Professor Alam has just spent the last half an hour, 35 minutes doing. May I ask a question? You at one point mentioned something which is very important, which is that Mujib's ideas should, we're at a time where Mujib's ideas should be updated. What exactly did you have in mind, or how did you think it could be done? Because it also ties up with what Professor Mahajan was saying, which is that there is a continuing relevance of it, of these ideas, right? Which the questions of identity, of cultural nationalism, even today, playing out differently in different parts of the world. And that is where I think the importance of what Professor Mahajan was drawing attention to, of identity being many things at the same time, and different aspects of it becoming, either being made dominant or becoming prominent, contingent to the situation. But you mentioned that you actually used the word updated, because I wrote it down. I was just wondering what kind of things you had in mind.
Maybe updated is not the word that I should have used, but what I meant was taking a cue from his own evolving position, that what we need to do personally is stick to the 1972 Constitution and use it as well as we can. So if we could do that, but then we can see Bangabandhu's position. His position was always the evolving one. And so new things coming in from the world outside, we have to adjust as much as we can to that. That's what I meant. I didn't want to say anything more than that.
Sure, but
and let me just say that, sorry, I just wanted to say that I'm not, what Ronnie said, I'm a Bangabandhu expert. I'm a professor of English literature, but I've translated his book and I've come close to him. If you translate books, line by line, you come close to the consciousness of the person.
Sure. The thing about, this argument that it would be good to get close to the 1972 Constitution, which is a very important and rich document, and which, as it happens, I have read for my own work. But it is equally true that a very central element of it, which is of secularism, has got modified in Bangladesh's own history in the decades that have followed, that you are very well aware of. And that in and of itself is a very fundamental compromise to the original vision as well as the original idea. But it is equally true that any constitution, a written constitution, written at any point in time, is also frozen in that time. And constitutions have to evolve as time goes by, one of which is through amendments. But that's one of the reasons why it would be very useful for us to hear how it's one thing to agree that there is a universal or an enduring value to his core ideas. That's one thing. The other thing, and likewise to the application of it. The other thing is, it is equally important for concepts and such ideas, especially political ideas and ideals, to be adapted to contemporary contexts, because the contemporary contexts evolve. And I was struck when you were speaking about how many times you said that, his own ideas are evolving with the passage of time. So let's say between 1975 and now, we had him with us, he would, by that logic, constantly be evolving his ideas, right? It's not that it would all be frozen in a particular point of time. It's in that sense that I was trying to ask you how you think that his ideas could be updated and, made more effective and relevant to today's Bangladesh as well as to today's world, not just Bangladesh.
I think it's open to interpretation. All constitutions are, and this is how judges work. They, as far as I know. So it's open in that sense. It's not done forever. And in 75, before he was assassinated, he was so brutally assassinated, he was already beginning to change the political structure. Or thinking of doing so. He had just introduced some changes. So he was not holding on to one position. His ideas were evolving even then in 75. So it's what I want to say is that he had given us the constitution, the principles, the ideals were there. And then he was beginning to adjust accordingly because of the situation in 75. So this is something he had done, and we can keep in mind that.
Sure. I don't think that is what is under any kind of difference of opinion. What I'm saying is, and one can very easily not even argue. It doesn't even have to make an argument that, say, something like secularism or equality or non-discrimination are universal and eternal values, but their application changes with time. Not only because times change, but our senses of identity also change, even within disciplines that subject disciplines that we study. I was struck, for instance, when, and perhaps Professor Mahajan can say a bit more about it, but I was struck by the fact that, in the course of our own evolution through, I studied in the 1980s in Delhi, and, at a time when gender studies and feminist studies was evolving and becoming very prominent and being extensively taught. I studied history, in history in particular, but everywhere across the social sciences spectrum. So the whole question of different aspects of your identity, what it means to identify as male or female or another gender. I think I don't think the argument that I was making was whether or not Mujib brought further changes between 72 or 75. The argument I was making was, how would we see those ideas evolving and becoming relevant to for instance, economically emergent Bangladesh in 2023? I'm not saying Mujib is a stagnant person. What I'm saying is, how do we make these ideas of his, how do we get people's buy-in to these ideas more than what already exists at the level of, say, a book fair or language and culture? Those things are already there, of course. Those are intrinsic parts of identity. But what you have said and what I have understood from your lecture is that Mujib is also much more than just the language identity. Right? So that's what
the language identity triggered a lot of things, but it's of course much more. So go back to the 4 pillars of our constitution, and that, and also that like to go back to the example I gave, that he himself was trying to adjust, move according to the changing situation in Bangladesh at that time. So there is always that scope for changing, and I think my paper, I've been using the word evolution. He's done that continuously, and he did that after 71 also. So there's a pragmatism involved. There's a kind of a response to what is going on. What I would not like to talk about how that can be applied now. That's beyond my domain. I don't have the mindset or the ability to talk about how we can adjust now. I can only go back and say these are the things that we can keep in our mind, and then have discussions, and then maybe some ideas will emerge from them that will take us forward in 2024. That's about all I would say.
Since I have limited familiarity with Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, I think I could be a little foolhardy and speculate. And I thought one of the things any political leader would need to think at this time, would be confronted with this issue, is that how would you reconcile the fact that you have also a Muslim identity and yet can be fair and non-discriminatory, which is what secularism is primarily about? And how do we reconcile and balance these two? Because I think at one time, maybe in the 70s, most of us thought that these were binaries and you had to offer one rather than the other. And I also get this impression that you're choosing the phrase cultural nationalism intends to say that when you are thinking of the culture of the people, I would say, it's a problematic thing because you can put so many things into the culture of the people. He chose at a certain time to give it a certain kind of definition. But as other issues arose, maybe that would have been something he would have applied himself to. Maybe he already did during his own lifetime, to see how we can balance this, and he has left us with this challenge. But I think certainly, looking at his trajectory, one would think that these are issues that one would need to address, because nothing is completely lost forever. There was this dimension to his idea. He foregrounded the idea of culture at a given moment in time in terms of what you call people's culture, which is whatever land or language or traditions and so on. But we know that those traditions and histories are enmeshed with all kinds of issues, problems, leads to foregrounding of some identity, marginalization of some hill people, tribes, and so on and so forth. So there are always these ongoing issues, and I think maybe it would be interesting. Maybe he did reflect on this sort of concern at some point. And I think that would be very, very relevant, as you said, to make his ideas available to everybody, not just in shaping the nation, but how we might think of these two things and how the two can go together. Maybe that's the kind of element.
Sorry,
Javed, did you raise your hand because you wanted to say something?
Yes. May I just say something to you in response to Professor Gurpreet Mahajan? first of all, there are two ways of seeing secularism. One is secularism is been viewed, first of all, that no religion has any connection with the state affairs. That is one. And second one is uh, state will facilitate or give freedom to every religious communities so that everybody can fully participate their religious freedoms, religious activities, but state will not prioritize any particular uh, religious community. So Mujib's understanding of the secularism is the second one, allowing every religious community to practice their own and religion. That is, we can, in short, we call religious freedom. He believes. So certainly, his secularist idea does not conflict uh, with the secularism that uh, you are conceiving. Uh, that is not, there is no conflicting situation. First, second, he only argues that do not bring any religious uh, predicaments to state affairs. So state affairs would be completely independent to religious uh, religious ideas or cultures. That is first. Second, Mujib's like um, in the century, we are seeing the big wars, continuous Ukraine war, and there are severe conflict in Gaza. So people are fighting and people are taking, there are lots of bloodshed. So here, if we understand Mujib's ideas of tolerance, because he almost his movements were um, non-violent movements up to a certain point where he unites all the different uh, groups of uh, groups of political leaders and other communities into one unified secular Bengali nationalist identity. So everybody feels that uh, we have religious identities, we have ethnic identities, we have other identities, but Bengali is the unifying identity that we all have. So, and as a Bengali individual, we are being oppressed and we are being suppressed by the uh, West Pakistani dictators. So that is the sense that he brings into action. So that, but not in conflict with, not he has not done any bloodshed or any um, direct war. We only get involved into the war after 25th March of 1971, when they have uh, committed genocide on us, starting from our Dhaka University. So, so that was the situation we have compelled to confront. But before that, we did not do any violent movement against any oppositional opinions or activisms. So Mujib's relevance today is the tolerance, how you will tolerate or how you will accommodate uh, different opinions, other religious views, and a diversity of cultures, how to harmonize, how to live with harmony with other um, different different opinions and cultures. That is the lessons of Mujib. Thank you.
Thank you, Javed. I don't think that Professor Mahajan was saying, and see, there are two things. We have to finish now. I'm very conscious of the fact that Professor Alam has to travel tomorrow, so we must finish. But I just wanted to say the difference between religion and state being one pillar of secularism and non-discrimination based on religious identity being the other pillar of secularism is universal to the understanding of secularism across the world. And I don't think any of the things that Professor Mahajan was saying either was questioning that or unraveling it. And there was certainly no question of accommodation, toleration versus violence. That wasn't. The conceptual question over here is that expressions of identity are expressions that are subjectively contextualized. Okay, so to give you an example from Professor Alam's lecture, which I don't contest, but this, what I'm going to say is intentionally opposing, is that Mujib spends a lot of time talking about the geography, the landscape, the greenery, the lushness of the greenery, etc., etc. You can find a number of cultures and peoples who live in arid zones and desert zones who speak extremely poetically about the desert, right? Which is not something that Mujib did. Quite the contrary, as Professor Alam just quoted, he had a comment about the difference in favor of his own context, which is absolutely fine and natural because he instinctively identifies with it. And that is, in my understanding, the principal framework of the set of questions that Professor Mahajan was asking, is that, or the points that she was making, is that they are, that our identities not only get articulated in contexts, but also aspects of our identities gain prominence in certain sorts of contexts, including language and what language we speak, and whether we will speak in Hindi or in Punjabi or in Bengali or in Tamil or in English as we are speaking now. But there we are. I am very conscious we don't have any more questions, so there are quite a few comments which everyone can see later on. But please, can I thank all of you for your time. Professor Fakrul Alam, for your time for the lecture. Thank you very much. Professor Gurpreet Mahajan, for your time and for your comments. And Ahmed Javed Chaudhry for this collaboration, which has been wonderful. Thank you also to the audience who've been watching and have been leaving comments. And as I say, at the end of all the events, we do an event every week. And at the end of every event, I say that if there's anything good that has come out of COVID, it is that we have all become technologically very savvy, and we've all learned how to use Zoom. And what it does do is it allows us to, connect like this literally across the world in different parts and bring forth these conversations, for which I'm personally and on behalf of the LSE South Asia Center very grateful, because if you do not give so much of your time and expertise, we can never have these conversations. So once again, thank you very much, everyone, and good afternoon.